This week we're damned. So this week we're looking at rivers. The plain, very muddy type you get, perhaps an area where there's been canal traffic. It's often man-made to get this much mud in the water and there's some kind of movement. Otherwise you'd get that beautiful clear river that we all associate with beautiful open countryside. This involves colouring the resin, but it's actually a very simple technique. Our real-world examples this week are taken from Cleveland, Ohio, the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. This is the view out the front of the bud car as we were driving along, and this is the engineer trying to see out a very grimy window. It was actually driven from a loco at the back, so the bud car wasn't doing any pulling. But there were some stunning views out the window, and there were also some very muddy rivers, which is why we're looking at them today. So here's the first muddy river we went past, and as you can see, it's very opaque, no depth really to it. This one, a little more depth perhaps, but only because it's shallow. As they get deeper, you see less and less. And the final example is from another river we went over, and you see the reflection. So if ever you're taking photos, make sure your reflection above it is blue. So what do you need to do this river? Well, main ingredient, resin, magic water, Envirotex Lite, either will do. You need some paint to colour your resin. I used a brown and a green, Tamiya XF72 and XF58 if you're interested. And the brown on its own is just a little bit too bright, and I find knocking it back with the green helps. You need a mixing cup and a mixing stick, and to cap it all off you just need a bit of acrylic gloss medium to give that lovely wave effect. So first up, what do we do? Well, really good dams is the answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these, and I've always used repair tape successfully, and last week on my waterfalls it let me down. And I think it's because the foam is slightly porous, but then it could be because the repair tape's quite old, could be for a number of reasons. But in the past I've not had a problem just using a sticky tape onto the side of a dense chipboard normally, and using that as the dam. Now it didn't work, I'm not going to chance it twice, so I'm going to use a different technique. And this one I'm going to use foam board because it's nice and stiff. I'm going to put it on and just cut it to size roughly. So to attach these I'm going to use the thinner one on here, silicone sealant, to make sure there's a really good bond. Okay, so before we put the dam on, to make sure it comes off, I'm just going to put some cling film around it. Good old trusty cling film. It's clear. If it gets caught up in your water effect, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to show through. You just need to make sure that you have it as smooth as possible, otherwise you end up with wrinkles in your water. And then all you need to do is just press it onto the edge. Now just press it firm, make sure there's no gaps. You can always pull the cling film tight later. Now because there's cling film, sometimes it doesn't stick as neatly as you might hope, because the cling film's quite loose around this. So sometimes you need a bit of masking tape on here just to hold it in place. On this one I'm going to put layers of resin in, different colours, and it's not very deep, and you know, it doesn't need a lot of depth to get this to work, but it's got the bigger hump of the waterfalls. Of course, once your water starts going that way, you can't keep it in. So although I've been through resin in previous episodes, here's a quick recap. I take a similar plastic cup, an identical one actually, and I use water to mark out the levels. You can do it by weight or you can do it by volume using measuring spoons. Once I've done that, I transfer those lines onto a clean, fresh, dry cup. Then I pour out the resin, it's 2:1 for magic water, to mix in the cup. There's a lot of mixing when it comes to resin, and as I did quite a few pours, there was a lot of stirring. So just keep stirring, stir Stir, 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 and when you get bored, stir a little bit more. So what I'm going to do at this point, which is part way through my stirring, is add my colour. Now I've got a muddy colour. It's kind of it's actually Tamiya brown. I like it. It's a nice colour. It'll come up a bit like the lid. And we're going to put quite a bit in. I'd actually diluted this paint, so you probably won't need this many drops when you do it, but put it in until you get a muddy coloured look. So here's the first pour. I poured it on the weir, I let a little bit of it run over just to colour the weir. If you don't want your weir to look too brown, then don't do this. And basically, because I'd cut my river slightly, not very level, it flowed towards the back, and I needed quite a few layers in the end to cover it. So now, watching my hair, just going to get rid of all of those bubbles. Now the last coat took 2 days to dry. Having said that, it was fairly stiff. I'm not kidding, wasn't that stiff. It was fairly stiff after a day, 2. So I'm going to keep putting these coats on until they build up. And you can see at this end where it's deeper, you start to get the colour coming through. And because this end's slightly higher, it'll actually be a little bit of a different colour up here. So we're going to build the layers up until it goes over the edge. And I'm just going to let that bit at the bottom find its own level, as long as it doesn't make a bid for the edge. At this point, it does become quite repetitive. I pour it over the weir, and then I backfill and fill up the resin until it finds its level. Really, there's not much else to say, except keep doing until you've filled your river. Oh, and don't forget to blow on the bubbles at the end to make sure you pop them all. It's the carbon dioxide, apparently, that pops them. So this is my third resin pour on this diorama, and I'm a little worried about this because the mini Cathy's helped me sort of mix it up, but let's hope they got the measurements right and that 3 mini Cathy's does make a good resin. Wow, after all those resin pours, I can't believe I'm done. There were a lot more layers on here than I perhaps expected, and it took a heck of a lot longer. And I had a little leakage over here, so eventually I dammed it up. Not exactly that well, I will admit, with some acrylic gloss medium. And that dam, well, it stopped it leaking, which is what I wanted. It is drying out, but very slowly. Worst comes to the worst, I'm just going to put a bush on it. Something to hide in that corner. Easy enough to do, so shouldn't be a problem. And, you know, now it's set, thankfully. This magic water has taken forever to set. It's taking like 3 or 4 days sometimes, which has been really worrying because you're thinking, is it going to set? Is it not going to set? So it's taken weeks to get this poured. I could have done it in one big go, but I always think with resin it's safer to do multiple layers than if one batch never sets. At least it's only one small amount you've got to worry about, and if you put something else on top, it's okay. So the moment of truth, I'm not going to take the bottom dam off because I haven't finished that yet, but I'm going to take this top dam off. So I removed the dam. It is just foam board covered in cling film, so it's easy enough to remove. I trimmed the cling film back, and then I trimmed the meniscus. That's the bit where the resin is risen up against the edge of the dam. I trimmed that back flat with an X-Acto knife against the water. It always does this, and it's a small detail, and magic water is very rubbery, so actually it's very easy to remove. Once I'd done that, I got out the acrylic gloss medium, any sort will do. Mine came from a hobby store, Hobbycraft in the UK. And I put it nearer the weir in vertical streaks, as if the water was beginning to go over the weir. And then further back, I splodged it on. We're going for an effect here. We don't have to model ripple by ripple. We just have to show that the water has turbulence and movement, which you can see it going in place here. And especially across the meniscus, I made sure there's plenty of acrylic gloss medium just to cover over that bump. Once I was happy with the gloss medium, I just left it to dry for a couple of days. You need to make sure it's thoroughly dry before you do the next stage, which was to put on some acrylic gloss, just varnish, to act as a barrier. I do find that over time, gloss medium can get a little bit tacky if it's damp in your modelling room, which mine is, and then it sort of reacts with the dust and it sets in. So this just acts as a barrier coat. We need to hide the edges because, as you can see, resin creeps. Now, that doesn't bother me too much if I'm doing loads of vegetation. But the first thing I always do before I put vegetation in is cover this. So what we need is a bit of grout and oops, there's my bag of grout, a spoon and a brush. So first up, a little bit of grout. A little bit more than that. A little bit of grout. You don't need a lot, and you just put it near the edge. This is slightly different colour because the base colour isn't going to be the one that I finally work out with, but it's the same colour as this side. You just put it near the edge. Now that our top's set, if any does fall onto the water, that's fine. You can just brush it off. See, like that. And you just get a brush and you just brush it into place. Now in this instance, I'm going to use drippy water. Sometimes I'll spray, but because I don't want it to run into my river, I'm going to be very careful about the amount I put on. So once I've got the IPA on, I put on some dilute white glue with water. Quite a runny mix, but not so much that it was going to pour straight into my river. And to be honest, some of it did flow into my river, but that's what tissues are for. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode on rivers and making them. Very simple river, very easy to do, easy to put into any layout, just need to make sure it's watertight. Help Kathy mix this resin. Come on guys, I think it's 1.5 N-scale Kathy's tall. Grab her up, let's get her up there and measure the side. It's half me, here's half, okay? Half. Now it's another me on top, just imagine, bit higher. Yeah, that's it. Looking good.
Pour the resin. Steady.
Hold it.
Fast. Hold
Steady.
it.
Oh,
come on.
Quick.
Hang on, Jack.
She's got to fast the car. I'm not doing that again. She can do the rest. I hope you're enjoying the series on water modelling. If you are, subscribe to me on YouTube, Kathy Millett, on my website, kathymillett.co.uk, or on Facebook, Kathy Millett Modelling. I'll see you next week when we're looking at rivers where you paint the base and use a clearer resin.